Welcome, psychology class. When we left off yesterday, we were talking about, the day before yesterday, we were talking about Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And we'd spent some time talking about this pyramid and ended the day with discussions around kind of critiques of his theory. And so that's where we were when we left off. You then followed up by reading a little bit about humanism and also about nature and nurture, which is going to be our topic today in class. So here we go. So a little kind of segue into our last section for the unit. So the young science of psychology developed from the more established fields of philosophy and biology. Psychology is growing and it's globalizing. I'm going to give you just a quick example of that. In China, the very first university psychology department began in 1978. And by 2008, there were 200 psychology departments. Moreover, thanks to different international publications and joint meetings and the internet and things like that, collaboration and communication now across borders has occurred. Psychology is growing and globalizing. The story of psychology continues to develop in many places and at many levels, with interests ranging from the study of nerve cell activity to the study of international conflicts. Across the world, psychologists are debating enduring issues, viewing behavior from the differing perspectives offered by the subfields that we're going to talk about today, in which they teach, work, and do research. What you're looking at right here is the most modern definition of psychology. We've talked about maybe 3 different definitions, historically speaking, but at this point we're at psychology is the science of behavior and mental processes. One of the biggest questions in psychology, a thematic question that runs throughout, is this big nature versus nurture question. Are our human traits present at birth, or do they develop through experience? This has been psychology's biggest and most persistent issue. The debate over the nature and nurture issue is ancient. Ancient Greeks debated this, with Plato assuming that we inherit character and intelligence, and that certain ideas are also inborn, and Aristotle countering that there is nothing in the mind that does not first come in from the external world through the senses. We're going to go over some of the other historical people that we've already discussed in just a little bit, but sorry about that. So the nature part, of course, is just our genetic makeup, and to what extent is what we believe, see, and how we behave just part of our genetic makeup, things that are already set in place at birth. And then how much is our environment, which is partly what we were talking about the other day, Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers talking about, you being aware of your environment and how it allows you to reach self-actualization, or if it hinders you in that process. So here's a quick kind of recap. In the 1600s, philosophers rekindled the debate that had been going on for a long time since ancient Greece. Locke rejected the notion of inborn ideas, suggesting that the mind was a blank slate on which experience writes. Descartes disagreed, believing that some ideas are truly innate, that we're just born with them. Descartes' views gained support from a curious naturalist 2 centuries later, and in 1831 an indifferent student but ardent collector of beetles, mollusks, and shells set sail on a historic round-the-world journey. Charles Darwin, of course, pondered the incredible species variations he encountered, including tortoises on one island that differed from those on nearby islands. Darwin's 1859 On the Origin of Species explains this diversity by proposing the evolutionary process of natural selection. And from among chance variations, nature selects the traits that best enable an organism to survive and reproduce in a particular environment. So his principles on natural selection are called by some the single best idea anyone ever had. It is still with us 150 years later as biology's organizing principle. Evolution also has become an important principle for our 21st century psychology, though. This would surely have pleased Darwin, for he believed that his theory explained not only animal structures, but also animal behaviors. The nature-nurture issue recurs throughout this text as today's psychologists explore the relative contributions of biology and experience, asking, for example, how we humans are alike and diverse because of our differing environments. For example, are gender differences biologically predisposed or socially constructed? Is children's grammar mostly innate or formed by experience? How are intelligence and personality differences influenced by heredity, and how are they influenced by environment? Are sexual behaviors pushed by inner biology or taught by their environment? Should we treat psychosocial disorders, depression, for example, as disorders of the brain, disorders of thought, or of both? I'm not sure how you want to record this in your notes, but I definitely want to just have a quick conversation about psychology's 3 main levels of analysis. You can also read about this in your textbook, so I don't know if you want to do a combination or if you want to write notes anyway. It's up to you. Here we go. So each of us is a complex system that is part of a larger social system, but each of us is also composed of smaller systems, such as our nervous system and body organs, which are composed of still smaller systems like cells, molecules, and atoms. These tiered systems suggest different levels of analysis, which offer complementary ways of looking at the world. It's like exploring why horrific school shootings have occurred. Is it because the shooters have brain disorders or genetic tendencies that cause them to be violent? Because they have been rewarded for violent behavior? Because we in the United States live in a gun-promoting society that accepts violence? Each of these are coming at a different level of analysis. Such perspectives are complementary because everything is related to everything else in some way. So together, different levels of analysis form an integrated, something called biopsychosocial approach, which considers the influences of biology, the psychological, and the social cultural factors. Each of these levels provides a different perspective on looking at behavior or mental process. Each by itself is incomplete. Like different academic disciplines, psychology's varied approaches or perspectives ask different questions and have their own limits. One perspective may stress the biological, psychological, or social cultural level more than another, but the different perspectives described complement one another and might shed light on the response to another question. Okay. Psychology also has a number of different subfields. Psychology has a number of different subfields. We're going to go over a few of those. I know this is a lot to take in right here, but again, you can read about this in your text. So let's take a look at behavioral, for example. So someone looking at psychology from a behavioral standpoint might attempt to determine which external stimuli triggered some sort of angry response or some sort of aggressive act from somebody. Someone looking at it from a biological perspective Might study like brain circuits and what actually causes us biologically to get like red in the face, or how heredity and experience influence individual differences in just temperament. You know, if your father is kind of a hothead, are you more likely to be like a hothead and anger quickly? Someone working from a cognitive perspective might study how the interpretation of a situation affects our anger and how our anger affects our thinking. So from like a more of a mental like encoding standpoint. Someone working from an evolutionary perspective might analyze how anger facilitated the survival of like our ancestors and things like that. Let's just do one more. A psychodynamic perspective. This should remind you of Freud. It might view an outburst as an outlet for some sort of unconscious issue or unconscious hostility, some sort of underlying issue that you may or may not be aware of and have to work to become aware of. Okay, even though this is slightly out of order, I want to put an end to the unit by talking about contemporary psychology and this guy named Martin Seligman. Here we go. Where are you, dude? This guy's pretty cool because for lots of reasons. First of all, he's the 31st most cited psychologist of the 20th century, which is pretty cool. He's 77 years old now. He has 7 kids and 2 dogs, if you care, and he's a bridge player. He also created the positive psychology association, which we will be using in class to a degree. So he's still alive and out there working, but what he has said is that who really cares about all this other stuff, that at the end of the day, that we need to explore how to be our best selves, and if we can't use psychology to do that, then, you know, what are we using it for? And I know that we could be using psychology to understand other people and help mankind and all those things, but at the end of the day, I want you to be able to take something away that will help you and will help you to flourish and live your best life. So he has developed this positive psychology, and he scientifically explores positive emotions, positive character traits, enabling institutions, and he says that we should ask psychology what it can contribute to our life, to a good life that engages one's skills, and what does it mean to develop a meaningful life. He says a number of things, but here's a little bit from his website. He says there are 5 elements to our own well-being: positive emotions, engagement. So like positive emotion, it can only be measured through like subjective to our own like willingness to engage in this process. Relationships, he says third, that relationships are really important. The presence of friends, family, intimacy, social connectedness through something. Fourth, he says meaning, belonging to and serving to something bigger than oneself leads to human flourishing. And then finally, achievement, accomplishment that is pursued even when it doesn't seem like it's going to be easy or maybe even possible. So one more time, I'm going to do the 5 elements to well-being again: positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning making, and achievement. And he says that those things help validate ourselves and help us move toward our best lives and human flourishing. Okay, you guys have some work to do. Please make sure you read carefully, because reading the supportive text is going to help like pull all of these things together. And I know there was a lot of big ideas that we covered in this introductory unit. Thank you.